All right. Welcome, everyone. It's our first police reform voting list. Before we start, I just want to say thank you to everybody that's put in a lot of work. We've received a number of amendments from the committee. We've obviously spent hours and hours on this package in the fall, and then obviously you sat through hours of hearings through session, and just want to say thank you to everyone that's put in so much work already to this point and for the work that we're about to do. Today we have 5 bills on the list, and we're going to just work through as many as possible. And if we need to have another session, we'll come back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. So first on the list, I'll just give you the order here. We'll start off with Senate Bill 74, which is Senator Washington. We'll then move to Senate Bill 599, and then we'll go to Senator Carter 627, and then again Senator Carter 178, and we'll wrap up with Senate Bill 600. So we'll see how it goes. We'll start the discussion, and we'll, as always, we'll start off with Council giving us a brief overview of the bill. We'll discuss amendments and move forward.
Senate Bill 74 requires each law enforcement agency to provide access to an employee assistance program or a mental health program for all police officers that the law enforcement agency employs. The assistance program required by the bill is required to provide officers access to confidential mental health services, including counseling services, crisis counseling, stress management, mental health evaluations, and peer support services for police officers. Additionally, the bill requires that in the following instances, a voluntary mental health consultation or counseling services must be available to an officer before the officer returns to full duty following these incidents. 1, a serious injury to the police officer. 2, an officer-involved shooting. 3, an accident resulting in a fatality. Or 4, any use of force resulting in a fatality or serious injury. There are 3 amendments in the voting packet. The first amendment that should be in your packet is ends in 872/1. This amendment would alter the provision of the public safety article relating to the certification of police officers. It would provide that the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission may not recertify or renew the certification of a police officer.
Which one?
You know, Senator, that it may have just been doubled. It may have gotten in there twice, but that should be. Oh, excuse me.
I have 8988872 and 818872.
You know what? Those are different amendments, and that almost never happens. The one I'm looking at is 818872. I apologize.
Thank you.
So that amendment requires provides that the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission may not recertify or renew the certification of a police officer unless the officer submits to a psychological evaluation. So this would be every 3 years when certification is renewed.
So that's the chicken amendment?
Right.
So this is recertification every 3 years?
Right.
Okay, so I'll speak to this. We talked about this during the hearing, and the concerns that were raised, that I think Senator Huff raised from before, is just the cost. So, Senator Bailey, please chime in on this too. But so it's my understanding, and Council, correct me if I'm wrong, that you get recertified every 3 years, right? And so the idea would be when you're going through that recertification process, you'd go ahead and get this screening. So, you know, in thinking through this more after the hearing, I wanted to put this out here for discussion. There were some serious fiscal concerns, but it may make more sense to require, which is in a forthcoming amendment, to require that type of just counseling session to make sure that someone is just, when they experience one of the experiences as enumerated in the bill, that they have a counseling session, and then they're made aware of all the resources that are at their disposal for mental health and counseling as they move forward, and make that session post-event something that would be mandatory. Now, the counseling would not be mandatory, but that one kind of checkup session would be. That's in a forthcoming amendment. So, good.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I was just going to say that I hadn't drafted that yet, so that would either be a concept or something we'd have to do tomorrow.
So that's, as I've thought through it, just understanding the fiscal concerns, but then also understanding what makes more sense. It makes more sense to have it after you experience one of these events, but, put it out there for the committee. But, Senator Bailey?
So my question, obviously, with the physical concerns financially, I mean, this is a huge issue to a department. And then my other question would be, who is the person that would be conducting that exam? Do they have to be, what type of certification does that person that would conduct that exam do? And then the next part of that is, what are the ramifications if somebody, is this a pass-fail? What are the ramifications if they fail? So if you had a police officer that had been on 3 years, was getting recertified, they passed the psychological to get hired, all of a sudden they don't get hired in 3 years, are we then, obviously that's something that happened in their job, that is then a full medical disability retirement? So I think financially, I cannot believe that this, and not being detailed out, that might be a conceptual something to think about, but when we look at the reality of it, I don't see how it could work in the agencies that I'm familiar with.
No, absolutely. Well taken and well said. Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll just chime in a little bit. So some of the larger jurisdictions have some additional resources. For example, I'll just speak about Prince George's County. We have a psychological services for public safety folks who, who are directed to after a significant, a serious or significant event. We have peer support, which is made up of public safety officials and civilians, and then there's an EAP, which is an employee assistance program that's sanctioned by the county government. So I'm not sure with the other counties if they have the employee assistance programs. That is a level of service that's provided to employees. It doesn't matter whether they're public safety or not. So I think as we look at this going forward, if the counties or the city has that particular service, that would cut down significantly on the cost, because part of the benefits of the employees of the county pays for that process. They are different than the folks that psychological services, the folks that are screening folks that are coming on the agency. That's where that significant cost comes. Just for informational purposes. And that's where you see the dollars when you're talking about mental health evaluations and resiliency sessions and the terminologies that those of us who sit on the Training and Standards Commission have heard from the psychologists on that panel. Those have a significant cost associated with it. And if you're going to take 20,000 law enforcement officers, in the state, and they have to do this every 3 years, that is a lot of money. But if you have an EAP program within each jurisdiction, then that program could be available to the members of public safety. So there's some work to be done. But I understand the concept of the bill. We definitely want to take care of the the folks that are out here doing the job. Huge fiscal note. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. The challenge we would have is that you couldn't double up. The EAP, the Employee Assistance Program, couldn't then serve as the evaluation program, because the EAP would be confidential. That's why, we have in our county, I think most, I'm not sure all of them, but I know from prior sessions in here that people have told us that their counties have them. And I'm not going to say all of them, and it's a great idea, but it truly is for confidential treatment to encourage officers to go in and other employees to keep them mentally healthy. But you couldn't then say, now you're also going to do double duty to evaluate, because now they're going to say, well, I'm not going to be so honest with you now because I don't want to lose my job. So, or be sidelined. So it wouldn't really defray the cost. Just my thought.
No, excellent. So I'm not going to formally introduce that amendment, but I wanted to put it out there for discussion because it was part of it was a critical part of a bill that we had earlier. But the idea that I had, that you talked about at the top, was just once you have gone through one of these events, and I guess I can have council kind of roll through and see how it would work, but you essentially would have a mandatory consultation, and then voluntary counseling you would have voluntary counseling services. So you basically just have to get basically a check under the hood, one sort of a consultation where someone says, hey, how are you doing? Takes a little bit of information, and then make sure that you are aware of all the resources that are available to you within the department, and then voluntary counseling if you want it. So if you want to go forward with it afterwards, then it's voluntary. So the cost incurred is minimal, but it's just a consultation after one of these events happens. It's not after recertification. It's not a mandatory recertification thing. It's not something that has to happen only under these limited circumstances. Would you just have a counseling and then be made aware of all those resources? So I don't know, counsel, if you want to kind of say where it would go, you can.
So looking at the bill, this would go on page 2 in line 20. Sorry, Senator, it's Senate Bill 74.
Just the raw bill, no, not the amended, not the inline. So this is a different amendment, but it's the same. It's just the raw bill. So just if you could.
Oh, it's not a formal amendment, Senator. It's we're just working off of inserts into the bill as it was introduced. So this would be on page 2 in line 20. So just reading from the beginning of the line, it says agency employs a voluntary mental health consultation or counseling services. Going on to the next line, before the police officer returns to full duty. So that would be rewritten to read, agency employs a mandatory mental health consultation and voluntary counseling services before the police officer returns to full duty.
So is everyone okay with that amendment? I'm just going to put it forward. And
Should it say mandatory confidential just to show that it's not?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Sure. So line 20 would read, agency employs a mandatory mental health consultation. Right, we could say agency employs a confidential mandatory mental health consultation and voluntary counseling services. It is. It's and.
Senator West says.
Thanks. So just to be clear on this, if one of these incidents is covered by subpart D, is the subject of a complaint and a disciplinary proceeding or something, and then if we end up passing it, the Public Information Act would make all the documentation public. This mental health evaluation would be not made public, correct?
In the MPIA bill, I don't have the text in front of me, but the circumstances and the types of records in that, I think this iteration of the bill limits those specifically to those complaints of misconduct.
I wasn't going to raise this, except this one, it would be mandatory. And so if a policeman had to subject himself or herself to a mental health examination, I think it would be essential that if we end up passing the PIA bill, that the results or the report of that examination not be included in the material which the press is permitted to gain access to.
I suspect there may be something in PIA that prohibits disclosure of those. I couldn't say 100%. I'd have to talk with somebody who's more regularly dealing with PIA issues. I could check on that for you.
Okay, well,
Another
yes.
thing to clarify then is that we're talking about disciplinary records, so this would not be attached to a disciplinary record necessarily. So I think that's another element of clarification that we would have to go forward, because the MPIA bill only deals with disciplinary records. It could be. We should clarify.
I mean,
HIPAA
it's a mental
laws.
health record, a confidential.
Yeah.
You can't get around the federal law.
We can certainly get greater clarification on that, Senator West. But
I think HIPAA would probably
HIPAA?
be
Yeah.
the relevant federal law on that.
Senator Bailey.
So my question would be on this mandatory evaluation. And working around the state with a lot of smaller police departments, and one of the requirements is an accident resulting in a fatality. So if, I'll give you some example, it could have been my agency when I was working on the water. If we had an accident like that, where there was a fatality, the entire district would be involved. So my question is, when you have a entire district or an area that has been involved, what are the requirements going to be that this is mandatory, that all of a sudden, wait a minute, nope, everybody's got to go get tested. Everybody's got to get a test before they come back to work. Who's going to be the people that are out there as the first responders in the meantime? Because in these rural areas, we don't have the ability, police departments don't have the ability to backfill like that.
Yeah, if I could take seconds on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, but just to clarify, it's not a test. It's just a consultation. So there are no ramifications. You can't fail this consultation, and it's more.
Before they return to full duty.
Yeah,
With a small department.
you have like 10,
Find an
15,
entire
20
department.
people that are. Yeah, I hear you, Senator.
Had 4 people working on the Hudson River. All 4, if you had a serious accident, all 4 are definitely involved. So, but it doesn't mean the fact that tomorrow there might not be an emergency that you might have to be working on, right? Or there might have to be, or you have multiple fatals, and you've got people that are missing, and you're still working. You get a fatal, right? Is it an unfortunate incident? Absolutely is. But because I had a fatal today that I dealt with, now I've got to go here before I can go back to work tomorrow? The practicality of that when you're a first responder does not make sense.
Yeah, I was just going to second that. I remember one of our, actually, it was Delegate Frederick County. He was on a crash reconstruction team, so I think his job was showing up when they had these bad accidents. And also thinking of the Maryland troopers that are flying those helicopters, they unfortunately probably have people die all the time when they pick them up in there. So probably to make it mandatory on a accident fatality, unfortunately, there's people like our troopers that often encounter that. So I would agree with Jack. It might be a hindrance in that case.
Senator Kessler.
Fatalities all the time.
Say it again. Senator Kessler.
Couldn't we just delete number 3? I mean, the serious injury to the police officer, that's different. An officer involved shooting, those are pretty unusual. An accident involving fatality, those are unfortunately pretty common. And then any use of force resulting in fatality or serious injury, those are not too common. So I would think if we just deleted number 3, take out the fatality. I defer to our 2 law enforcement folks, but maybe that would satisfy that.
Senator Jackson.
I think, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I haven't traveled the state, and you're right. Some states don't, some jurisdictions don't have the resources to do that. But for the mental health and wellness of our folks, I think we've got to make sure that they know that these services are offered. So I think what Senator Casserly said, I think maybe the enumerated circumstances may be something we look at modifying. And also, are we looking to ensure that during basic training for these men and women that they do know that these are available? So you have an orientation component, you have your entry-level trainings, that they are very much aware that these are resources that are going to be available to them. The mandatory piece, initial consultation during the training component, during the training time when they come on the agency, developing a comfort level with someone who comes in and talks to you about these are the things you're going to be experiencing. Again, in the larger academies, they have that segment where the psychological services folks come in, the peer support folks come in, and so they know that those are available. But fatalities on our roadways are all too common. But
So what if you did that, at Senator Cassidy's suggestion, if you were to kind of break it out so that this consultation would only apply to serious injury to the police officer, an officer-involved shooting, any use of force resulting in a fatality or serious injury? You think that makes better sense? Okay.
But part of what we're doing is that, most of these are bringing us right back to the accountability phase that should be occurring in these agencies anyway. And so that supervisor should notice if something is affecting, me on the street on that squad. So, but this is kind of bringing it, beginning to move in that direction, but I think that gets us there.
Excellent. Senator Sidnor, did you want to chime in?
Thank you. Well, I understand, or at least I believe I understand what the senators were offering. I'm thinking that because of the frequency of accidents that result in fatalities, those are the kind of things that you want to make certain these types of services are provided. I don't know if we may have a cleaner way of just creating maybe another subsection where you're talking about the mandatories and just breaking it out and leaving this section intact as it is as the voluntary piece. But I would think that you would want to continue leaving the accident piece in.
I think, if I'm hearing understanding, I think under the proposal that would still, these four still stay as are. You just have another section for the mandatory would only apply to serious injury, officer-involved shooting, and then fatality or serious bodily injury use of force. If I'm right, I think that's what it would.
EAP guidelines and restrictions. Let's say an officer, for instance, was on a fatal that involved a child, maybe the same age as one of their children, right? They can definitely, an officer can go for EAP counseling at any time, right? There is no, that already exists. So don't think that that's not, we're not trying to fix something that already, we already have training and access immediately available. All an officer has to do is say, hey, I need some help. That's already established. And the fact is, if a supervisor happens to see some issue with one of their subordinates that is an issue, that supervisor, that's his or her duty, responsibility to say, hey, do you need some help? Do you want, because this is, we've got EAP and it's available today, right? If there's something happening in your life that you need help with, we want to get you the mental help that you need. That part of this already exists in today's policing.
Jamie, then, can you just again, recite, like, from, if you start off from line 17 and down, what the amendment would look like and what the bill, what's left at the bill?
Sure. So just based on my understanding, I think we might need to, if you wanted to roll with this, we might need to do it in concept, but based on my understanding of what's being said, would be that for number one, a serious injury to the police officer, the consult would be mandatory. The same with number two, which would be an officer-involved shooting. And also number four, the use of force resulting in a fatality or serious injury. But for number three, it would be voluntary. So we can do that language. I don't know that I could do that on the fly, but if the committee wanted to move that in concept, I could do that on the back end. The only technical piece that that may be worth clarifying on it is number one involves, it specifically says that it involves the police officer. So it says serious injury to the police officer. Number two doesn't specify, I guess, the officer's involvement in the officer-involved shooting or the accident resulting in fatality for three, or for number four, use of force resulting in fatality or serious injury. So it's not clear from the text if
It's the officer,
it's the officer who exercised the use of force, or what their involvement relative to the accident and resulting in a fatality was, or if they were the officer who fired the firearm.
So obviously, the intent is that the subject
Not merely present, but actually have been
Correct.
Directly involved.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, Senator Helen.
Thanks. I mean, I can imagine a scenario where somebody's there with their partner and, the partner witnesses the whole thing. Would you consider that to be involved? Or you're talking about only the person who actually...
You're if I might, you're actually involved if you're on that scene, because
I can't hear you.
you're gonna be. I'm sorry. You are actually involved if you're on that scene. If we're partners and you get in a shooting, I'm there. I'm a witness to that.
Right.
I have to do a report as well, and so you're actually involved in it, even if
that-
you're not the one who.
Then that's
who
fine.
yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that it's more expansive.
Yeah,
than less.
that certainly covers it.
You understand, so the draft of the language has to be that it's, the folks that are actually directly involved. I don't know if that makes sense, but
So direct involvement in the general sense that they were there. That they were at the scene.
not at the scene after the fact, but at the,
At
the
the
occurrence
scene
of
of
the event.
the incident. The police officer returns to full duty following the officer's involvement in one of the following instances, or any of the following instances. To say that the officer was involved in some way, giving it the broadest definition, but clarifying that it still needed to be that they were actually involved. Yeah, I can put that language in, yeah. So it would be, actually, just give me a minute to
Sure,
write
absolutely.
it in.
While he's doing that, I didn't see any other amendments. Well, I guess the sponsor has an amendment for it as well, so we'll wait off.
So the lead-in language immediately before the list would be before the police. This is just on line 21. Services before the police officer returns to full duty following the officer's involvement in any incident involving, and then the list. I don't know if you'd want to do it as a second amendment for the committee to consider, or just part of the same amendment. But in concept, what we would do is make number 1, 2, and 4 require a mandatory consultation and voluntary counseling, and number 3 would be a voluntary consultation and voluntary counseling. And also with the confidential language that was mentioned earlier.
So let's do this. We can prepare. It's getting more complicated I think, for people to digest the concept. So let's prepare that amendment, and then we can go ahead and. Yeah, this is pretty straightforward, and everyone seems to be in agreement. It looks like we worked out all the kinks on it, so it won't be difficult to move on early. So let's go ahead and, once this is done, everyone seems to be okay. I don't see any other objections to it. Let's move on to.
Technical amendment to do on this.
Yeah. So say move on to Senator Washington's the other amendments, and we can adopt those, and then or not, and consider another bill.
So the next amendment is 898-872/1. This actually borrows identical language from Senator West's bill. I don't actually have the bill number in front of me, but this relates to the early warning systems. So what this would do is it would alter a provision of law that requires currently that each law enforcement agency must establish a confidential and non-punitive early intervention policy for counseling officers who receive 3 or more citizen complaints within a 12-month period. Instead, each law enforcement agency would be required to establish an early intervention system to identify police officers who are at risk or engaging in the use of excessive force, and to provide the officers with training, behavioral interventions, reassignments, or other appropriate responses to reduce the risk of use of excessive force. And the next page just provides a system described in this section may not prevent the investigation or imposition of discipline for any particular complaint.
Questions on the amendment? Senator Sidner, or something's percolating.
I'm trying to balance in my mind what I think might be a better system, one that is triggered by complaints versus one that's built on identifying somebody who may be at risk, whereas you have something that's more solid with the complaints that have been done. That's kind of what you probably saw my head furrow in trying to understand what might be a better measure for this. I mean, would the sponsor, would you mind kind of talking about the impetus? Or
Well, this stems from the concern about the use of excessive force. So it's triggered by a law enforcement agency which wants to identify police officers who are at risk of using excessive force before they use the excessive force, and provide them with training or behavioral counseling or whatever, which would reduce the likelihood that that officer would engage in excessive force. So it's a little bit of a different animal than what we were just talking about.
Would it be better as an A and a B maybe? Because it looks like they're probably both trying to get at two different things.
They are trying to get at two different things.
I mean, I have no problem with what you're trying to get at. I think it makes sense too, but also
Yeah.
like the three or more complaints that.
I'm not sure we have an either-or situation. We could be an
both.
and.
Yeah, I'll be fine with that.
Yeah. I think we agreed that we could have both this amendment and something along the lines we were discussing before. The one doesn't exclude the other. We could have both.
So my question has to do with the fact of if getting 3 complaints is what triggers this. Now, if they are 3 unfounded complaints, same existence, same thing still applies, because, in one afternoon, in one incident, if somebody didn't like the way that you handled yourself, you're going to get more than 3 complaints at one time. They might all 3 people might say, "Hey, we're calling in."
So to clarify the point that I think was made earlier, if you look at the reprint, this is actually adding the language from Senator West's bill in addition to the language that we were just discussing in what's already there in Senator Washington's bill. So it would be a both and.
Jamie, could you speak up for just?
Sorry. And that's correct. To Senator Bailey's point, the amendment and the bill language from the other bill strips out the 3 complaints language, so that's actually bracketed out. The current law provides that each law enforcement agency shall establish a confidential and non-punitive early intervention policy for counseling officers who receive 3 or more citizens' complaints within a 12-month period. So that 3 or more complaints in a 12-month period is coming out in the bill.
Okay.
So this changes the current law.
Right.
Right, but that was actually that was my concern. What I was suggesting was that the language that's bracketed out remain, and that would be A, and then there would be a 3516D that talked about the system to identify. Again, and the reason I'm saying that is I think that generally, and this is not to negate the fact that people file false complaints, but generally speaking, where there's smoke, there's probably some fire, and I just think that those complaints are in and of themselves probably early indicators that something's going on. So
I think you're still going to capture that smoke, but the trigger point wouldn't be just those 3 complaints. But if that makes
So it would seem to me that if a law enforcement agency establishes a system to identify police officers who are at risk, the frequency of complaints filed against the police officers certainly would be something that would be a part of that system, which would trigger concern. I guess my concern about the language in the existing law is you could have an incident and multiple people could file complaints about that incident, and so you get 3 complaints filed about a single day. So we're not talking about complaints every time. In general, in my bill, I tried to leave it up to the professionals to get down into the weeds on these things, but basically provide an overall direction as to the direction they should go.
I was just looking, it reminds me when I was in the Air Force, because I worked around nukes, we were on the Personal Reliability Program, what it was called. And actually, I'm looking it up right now, and it's essentially, the military says they need to develop a system kind of similar to this. I don't think we want to micromanage it, but once there was a system, there was a policy, and we were told all kinds of things. Like if you go on, if you take a prescription that's anything more than aspirin, you got to tell us, you got to do this and that. It wasn't micromanaged out, but it was micromanaged when it got to us. But it's funny, I'm looking at the regs right now that created it, and it's basically you create a policy, they set guidelines, what they want, but they left it up to, like what Chris said, the departments to figure out.
I was just about to say, I think what both senators said makes sense.
So is everyone, any other comments on this amendment? I mean, are people are clear about what it does? Is everyone okay with that? All right, so make a motion just to adopt it. Sorry.
I came off of it, but I believe there's a syntax error in the amendment. Let me see if I have it here. So, shouldn't it be who are at risk of or engaging in? Are we missing an of?
Oh, you are. Who are at risk or engaging in the use of? Yeah, I think you're right. Good job. You're right. I think you're right.
I think you are right.
My mother, also an English teacher.
So the amended amendment would be to add of in the new text after risk, I suppose.
Yep. Is everyone okay with that? All right, is everyone to adopt that amendment? All right, excellent. Do we have any other amendments to consider in this, or is that the last one?
There is one more. So another grammatic amendment that I wanted to flag for the committee after this one. So this last amendment is 303727. This is from Senator Washington, and it would strike mental health evaluations on page 2, line 15. That's the list of services that need to be provided in the Employee Assistance Program. It would strike mental health evaluations and replace that term with resiliency sessions.
Okay. Does anyone know what a resiliency session is? I don't know.
We don't know. I'm hesitant to put it into
Yeah.
law.
Senator Jackson.
Well, I don't really know what that term means, but I can tell you during the sessions that Senator Huff refused to go to at the training commission, that the psychological that the psychologist would refrain from, because of the attitude of folks in public safety, military, and whatever. When you say mental health or psychological screening, those are connotations that kind of cause folks to steer away from those programs. And so I don't know if Senator Washington came up with that to kind of have a kinder, gentler version of someone being assessed. So I can only speculate that resiliency session, with the herbs.
So
and
I'm not sure what
flowers
the
and-
term actually means, although I did go back and listen to the bill hearing, and Senator Washington had indicated that that amendment had been requested by law enforcement. But I'd be happy to go back and reach out to some folks and find out more clarity on what the term means.
Okay. So let's just table that then, since no one knows what a resiliency session means. So that's the last one? Or is one more for?
There is one more. There's no prepared amendment for it, but I just wanted to direct the committee's attention to a technical issue on page 2, line 7, or 6 and 7. So this is the requirement for the EAP. It says each law enforcement agency shall provide access to an employee assistance program or a mental health program for all police officers. But then in subsection C, the only thing that's actually defined is, or explained what it is the employee assistance program, and that's the requirement for the counseling services, crisis counseling, et cetera. So I just wanted to flag it for the committee that the requirement could be satisfied by creating a mental health program. I suppose could be interpreted as something that's distinct from the employee assistance program.
Program.
Strike or a mental health program, so there's just no distinction, or a false distinction. On line 7, right? Line 7, yes. Sure, yes, Senator Heddleman.
So we've already established that all police forces have EAP programs? Well, I mean, I guess I just was imagining that this would be a way to kind of farm these services out in the event that they didn't have a fully robust EAP program. But I don't know the answer to that question.
Jurisdictions have EAP programs. Public sector has programs, whether they deem it EAP, but they have those programs. The key is, does the public safety agencies engage in it, or do they have their own support, peer support and psychological services and whatever? But public sector governments have programs such as that.
But I don't know what the reason was. I mean, why would, I guess we should, I don't know.
Erroneous. It seemed from my reading that
Duplicative?
the bill creates a mandate essentially for each law enforcement agency, and it seemed that there was a choice that could be made, that they could either provide an employee assistance program or a mental health program. That could be one reading. The other reading is that it could have been intended as all being part of the same thing,
Okay.
but it just seemed ambiguous.
That's fine.
I had one other suggestion. At the very end of the bill, it says that each law, this is not an amendment, but it's a concept. Each law enforcement agency shall develop a policy to provide access to the services required by this section at minimal cost to a police officer. My feeling is if a police officer incurs mental health problems because of their performance on the job or things they've encountered while on the job, we should replace minimal cost to no cost. We should not require the police officers to come out of pocket to pay for mental health expenses that they're only experiencing or having to pay for because of what they've experienced on the job. That's my feeling.
Sorry, Senator Bailey.
I agree with Senator West's position on that. I mean, especially if we are, we're saying every police department's got to have it. Why should this cost? This is something that they incurred while they were working. This should clearly be covered. It shouldn't be a cost to them. And quite frankly, going to these, I mean, I think most chiefs and everyone allow these officers to go while they're on their duty time, but they should, because it occurred on duty, they should be compensated, should be part of their duty day when they're going to these.
And I concur with that. I think, so again, these programs are set up through the government, and as part of public sector employees, they are there for you. I don't know why that was put in there. Good catch, Senator West. Typically, you know, a person is directed to a service within the county or city, it's free costs. I mean, you have a benefit package when you join the agency, so I don't know why that was in there. Good.
Okay,
Say that again?
isn't there usually a copay?
No, because you have a benefit plan or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, so there's not a, I don't know if that's what the indication is here. You know, when we sent people to
So-
psychological services or wherever, they didn't have to pay anything, so.
I agree, but I have no idea how much that would cost, A. But B, as you said here, would that then apply to, and Senator West, maybe you can answer this question, so if you go to the first page of the bill, then would it apply to financial issues, legal issues, family problems, office conflicts, alcohol and substance abuse disorders, all of that? Would you have to pay for? No? Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I apologize, Mr. Chair. I just reread it. So it would be, so the definition of employee assistance program means a work-based program offered to all police officers that provides access to voluntary and confidential services to address the mental health issues of a police officer stemming from. So the mental
All
health
that
issues,
stuff, yeah.
it's to address the mental health issues from personal and work-related concerns, including stress,
Got it.
financial issues. So the program wouldn't actually address those issues directly, just the mental health piece.
I like it. I just don't. I have no idea how much it's going to cost.
Minimal, so what's the difference between minimal and no?
Fair point. Let's adopt this technical amendment first. So on page 2, line 7, it's to strike or mental health program. Is everyone okay with that? All right. And then, Senator West, you had an amendment you want to put forward? You want to?
Propose or move that we change the word minimal on page 3 to no.
Second.
It's been seconded. All right, we need a roll call on that. Is everyone okay with that? Senator Huff, what do you think? You're all right? Everyone's cool? All right. Everyone's cool? All right.
As long as it's drafted right, we're not paying for somebody to force it.
Yeah, exactly right. That's initially what I was like, oh, man. All right, so then that leaves that First Amendment that's outstanding, which we will, since it got a little complicated, I think it's probably not wise to adopt it in concept. Let's see it in writing first. So we'll save that for our next session, but pretty much close to done on that one. That's the last amendment for this bill, isn't it?
It is.
Okay, great. So we'll just bring this up at the next time. It shouldn't take much time. Famous last words, but. Okay. We'll go on to Senate Bill 599.
Senate Bill 599 prohibits a law enforcement agency from receiving the following equipment from a surplus program operated by the federal government: an armored or weaponized aircraft, drone, or vehicle, a destructive device, a firearm silencer, or a grenade launcher. There is one amendment in your packet. This is Amendment 793-320/1. And it would, on page 2 of the bill, line 14, currently provides for an armored or weaponized aircraft, drone, or vehicle. This would change "or" to "and," so it would now read an armored and weaponized aircraft, drone, or vehicle.
Weaponized once it's armed.
It would be,
No, this is the chief's suggested amendment. I'm not sure if maybe it's drafted the best, but what they're trying to get at is basically number 3, Roman numeral 3, armored vehicles, that they would still be able to purchase those. And, you know, I'll just speak from personal experience, having this year been through both sides of, you know, political riots, essentially. I was down there at the White House after the RNC acceptance speech, where I walked out and it was mayhem. Police were getting attacked and protecting us, and it was crazy. And then obviously being there on January 6th and seeing that, I think shows a reason that our police departments at times need armored vehicles when we have situations that come up. I actually, in the past, had been supportive of this type of legislation and been a bit more libertarian on it. But having gone through and seen some of the violence and things happening in our country, it's an unfortunate fact nowadays that our police sometimes may need to have an armored vehicle. So this would allow them to get it. Otherwise, they can still buy an armored vehicle. They just can't get it from a military surplus. So it just would seem to me that, you know, if there is a armored vehicle that they could get at a cheaper rate, why would we want them to pay more?
So, my question is not directly dealing with this amendment, but is actually dealing with aircraft. Why are we not allowed to get aircraft from the military?
What do you mean? Currently, the policy reason behind it, or currently you are? I mean, this is just basically for the 1033 program, which is just the at cost.
Saying you couldn't get an armored or weaponized
So it's-
aircraft.
yeah.
Which I don't know that.
Like a weaponized drone, or, you know.
The only one I think comes into play is the number 3, is the vehicle ones, because they're going to buy armored vehicles. I don't think they shouldn't buy armored drones or weaponized drones. They shouldn't buy armored planes or weaponized planes. The only thing I can think of is, and I know they have, are these big armorized trucks that, you know, we saw them in the city of Baltimore when they had riots that they had to bring them in. That's what they're there for, in case you have, you know, these types of uprisings.
If I'm being frank, like,
riots.
I'm not like, the primary, for me at least, was, you shouldn't have these offensive weapons like out in communities. I know that, you know, some people would argue that this is a paramilitary organization, but you just, like, for me, the policy reason was, I don't think you should have, like, weaponized drones or offensive, you know, weapons, you know, out there from the military. So when you do this amendment, it's look, I also think there's a force projection element and an intimidation element, you know, that's definitely real. I definitely don't want law enforcement going out into dangerous situations without the equipment they need to accomplish their mission and stay safe. So, you know, not a super offensive amendment to, but for me it was just like about making sure that those offensive weapons, and that, you know, there wasn't really the purpose for force projection and intimidation. But I mean, you bring up a valid point. So
I mean, I'm looking at the way they have it drafted, because I don't think you need to exempt or allow armored or weaponized aircraft. You don't need to allow armored or weaponized drones. It's literally only armored vehicles. So that's what I'd like to do, is I'd like to just offer up that we could exempt and allow them to buy from military surplus armored vehicles.
Senator Jackson and then Bailey, and then anyone else?
I'll just chime in on what Senator Huff has stated. You know, in my agency, we were able to purchase such vehicles, and they're personnel vehicles. You know, if you have to extract someone from an incident, but it's an armored vehicle. It protects the law enforcement officers or whomever you may have to rescue. That's what the vehicles are for. They're only out on a certain scene. They're not seen until you have a major incident, which are minimal. So I would suggest the vehicle piece, take out 1 and 2, and then keep 3. And drop weaponized.
Use these for SWAT teams too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're rescuing folks from scenes or getting close to, if you have a sniper somewhere, you get close to the facility, how do you approach that? So.
I agree with the senator about the vehicles, and some of the armored vehicles that exist that are sometimes available to rural areas are very, they have a very high clearance, and so that even though that vehicle might be armored on the outside, it can be utilized to move people out of areas in time when we have emergencies and disaster areas that we can, and that is available to the state, so the state could utilize those. So I know that in some of the armament, you've got big personnel carriers that are actually, because of all the roadside mines, they're actually able to sustain that. So it could be what could be considered armored. But I think in the vehicle situation, where I come from, we deal with significant hurricanes in the summertime. Having a vehicle with high clearance to utilize people and move them out of an area is something that definitely can be used.
So I've never liked that we went with the all-black police cars. I think having a friendly-looking police force is important. I used to, in my county, we would have, we have 3 municipalities, and you knew who the cops were by the color of the car. They were nice blue and yellow, and, it was more friendly-looking police. I'm not sure we went to the black. So I'm in favor of not weaponizing or having a police force that looks more like a community assistance force than an attack force, an assault force. On the other hand, there's been, we're in a dangerous part of the country. Let's face it, and we have to provide mutual aid. My guys provided emergency mutual aid over the line to Pennsylvania. We've had Amish shootings up there where people wiped out, a school of Amish kids. My district alone has had 3 mass shootings involving with weapons. The ones that Senator Huff cited, we all remember. Most of us, I think, remember the D.C. sniper. I had one in the north end of my county where a guy. So we have 2 up armored vehicles, one on the north end of the county, one on the south end of the county. They sit in the 2 main precincts. They just sit there. They have to go out for maintenance and stuff, but they just sit there. They're up armored Humvees. And the north end of the county, we had a guy who barricaded himself in his home and fired out. They told us the last time this bill came up, it was like 150 rounds or something. Neighbors were like literally lying, fleeing for the basement and stuff. He was just tearing it up. They were able to bring this vehicle in, and there's no way he could touch an up-armored Humvee. They just rolled right up, and then were able to take it out. He literally had people lying on the floor in their houses, keeping them down. So, I don't want this stuff, but, let's face it, it's a dangerous world out there, and when you need it, you really need it. My sheriff, you don't put it in the parades, you keep it, it's there when you absolutely need it. The other things you've got here, look, drones, I don't know, you're not going to get a weaponized drone off of the military. You're not going to get a Predator drone, but drones are great. They're those little surplus drones, we have tons of them left from around, and they just got the video cameras on it. So those are really nice to have to just, you can throw it up in surveillance, and you get it. Aircraft, we're not usually getting much surplus aircraft because they're all beat up. But then even things like a grenade launcher, an M203 grenade launcher, that's what you use in riots. That's what's popping those tear gas grenades, lobbing them out 100 yards. That's an M203 grenade launcher. It's the same one that would launch a grenade. It launches a CS canister. So we just have to be careful because some of that, you called for mutual aid to a major riot or something. You want to have some of this stuff. I'm not sure why we would need silencers or to use the word weaponized. I'm not sure what that means because if you get a Humvee, it's got a turret in it. It's got a turret. It's got a gun port. It doesn't come with the gun, but I don't know. Was that weaponized? I saw where people had purchased the MRAPs, the armored vehicles. They don't come with the weapons if you buy them from the feds, but it certainly has a gun turret. You could, if you got yourself an automatic weapon, you could just plop it in the turret and start firing away. So we just got to be careful how we do this, because it's nice for us to say push back, but when those DC snipers hit and you're like, thank God we got it. Somebody's got it. They can roll in and do it. So I just ask us to be cautious, because we're in an area of the country that can go from being bucolic and beautiful. I mean, I've had within almost a square mile in the middle of my district has had 3 mass shootings in 1 year. In fact, just yesterday was the 5th anniversary of the shooting of the 2 deputies in my district 5 years ago. So, you know, it makes you a little bit more hesitant to say cops don't need to sometimes up armor a bit. So that's all.
And just to be clear, I mean, they can still get all this stuff. It's just, this is just precluding them from getting it, like, you know. Yeah.
I was looking at the prices for up armored Humvees.
And
I mean,
reps,
they're getting
yeah.
them for like 30 grand or something, and you know that's almost a $500,000 piece of equipment. If you're buying it on the open market, up armored vehicles are expensive.
But I guess there's a balance to be struck between, you know, having all the extra goodies and then the actual essentials. So, but I get it. Let's do Senator Hedelman, then Bailey, then Huff.
I was just going to say, and I think from what you said, they exist already. So our police forces have these, right? So.
Everybody's mine has them.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm sure yours is not the only one, is my point. So they exist, and there are also alternative means of getting them. So I just want to make that point.
So, and I would say the way that most of the police forces got them was through the military programs. But the one thing that I wanted to bring up, just to talk about aviation, as we talked about just for a minute, you know, everybody's familiar with the Maryland State Police. But the Maryland State Police aviation is set around medevac. So they could be doing any law enforcement operation that there is. If there is a medevac incident that comes out and that helicopter is in the air, they are required and they deviate from that law enforcement to go to the medevac, right? Doesn't matter. So when we were working on the water, we had a Natural Resource Police had an aviation unit, the only one that would do search and rescue. Now there is no doubt about it. Definitely the troopers, helicopters would come and they would definitely work with us, right? When they could, they would definitely be there. You were in a chase, you were in a search and rescue, whatever, but the minute something happened, they had to deviate and they left you, right? And you could, unless it was a live search and rescue mission that you were on with them at that moment. If it was a body recovery, anything like that that they were trying to help you do, they had to leave. Or if it was strictly law enforcement. So the Natural Resource Police with their helicopters, and they were the one helicopter that we flew, and I was an observer there, was a Huey. We got it through military surplus. So that helicopter, clearly we could not, the state could not have afforded that to be able to utilize that through traditional means. So the only thing that I wanted to be able to say was the fact that we didn't want to prevent, and I don't know the actual definition of armored when it comes to aircraft, but if there was a way for us to get another helicopter just for search and rescue, something that could work in the future, I don't want to prohibit that by this bill saying that we can't do that.
Now I'm confused because I was going to offer, that's a good question because I don't know that. That's a good point about the Huey and stuff. I mean, the prices, I mean, my municipality, we have one of these Bearcats or whatever, but it's going to be dramatically reduced. I mean, I always knew that a lot of stuff that we sent over at the Guard, I was told we just gave that to we just left it in Iraq rather than ship it back. So I know that stuff once it's used has got to be a lot less. So I was just going to offer up to say on the vehicles, the vehicles would have to be armored and weaponized because no one should be buying a Bradley tank with a turret on it and, ready to shoot or anything. I can't imagine. So at least I wanted to offer that on the vehicles, just say they armored and weaponized.
So then, does it have to be drafted slightly different than?
It does. It should.
So-
It would have to say, because
'Cause
right
that-
now the amendment would
it
affect
modifies
aircraft,
everything,
drones,
yeah.
and vehicles. So the amendment should just affect Roman numeral 3. Maybe make a new number 2 and say armored and weaponized vehicles.
Go ahead, you know what he wants to say. Go ahead, you can.
Or weaponized vehicles.
So does weaponized mean? I mean, it has a weapon on it? I'm not sure what weaponized means.
They're not gonna sell on top of the Humvee. They're not gonna put the grenade launchers.
No, but they come with it, I mean, the standard one has a turret on top of it. It's up. If that's not weaponized, then yeah, that's fine. I just don't know what we mean.
Weaponized would be the actual grenade launcher you put in there, or
If that's our definition, that it's not, it's not equipped with a weapon,
you can't use a turret as a weapon. I mean, you can put a weapon in it.
you can put a turret, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the purpose of a turret.
So what would it say?
So,
What are you suggesting for the?
I guess the way that I was reading it and the way that Senator Huff had described it, it sounded like the armor was all right, but the intent was to not allow the weapons. If, as it's drafted, it says an armored and weaponized aircraft, drone, or vehicle. If the intent's to get rid of weaponized vehicles or aircrafts or drones, I would say just strike and armored and leave it at the prohibition only affecting weaponized, because the way that it's drafted, it could be a weaponized vehicle but not armored, and it would still qualify.
Helicopter, if they bought it from the Army and they're going to use it for search and rescue, if it's got armor plating on the bottom of it and they got to take, I don't know how that works. And I don't think drones are ever, I don't know. I mean, look, I don't think they're armored. At least the ones I've seen.
That's what their dwell time.
So I would, I'll amend mine. If I think Jamie's saying is more clear, just say weaponized.
So say it again.
So the language would now read, a law enforcement agency may not receive the following equipment from a surplus program, and just reading number 1, a weaponized aircraft, drone, or vehicle. So we would strike out in line 14, strike and armored or. Right.
So Senator Hettleman.
Thank you. Can you explain to me what the difference is? What does weaponized mean? It is capable of having a weapon affixed to it?
It says, I'm looking at the dictionary, it says to supply or equip with a weapon or weapons.
Right.
Question to me? So, right, the bill doesn't define weaponized, so the dictionary definition would probably be the best bet for it, which I believe Senator Castley, I didn't catch the
It just said
definition.
equipped with, it says to supply or equip with a weapon or weapons.
So, right, then I think it would be interpreted as that it was supplied or equipped with weapons. So that would be what it means to be a weaponized vehicle, is that the vehicle was supplied or equipped with weapons.
So I guess, so if they were to, so it seems to me that if they were, they are precluded from purchasing an armored vehicle because it can be weaponized. Like what we were all talking, a tank.
No, I mean, well, the bill as it's drafted seems to draw a distinction between armor and weaponry, because
Right,
those
but
are
if you
two different terms being used. So I don't know that armor would qualify as weaponry. The way that I read that is, and this is just my reading, is that it would actually have to be an actual weapon of some sort that was supplied or affixed to the vehicle.
Well, that, to me, that doesn't make sense, because then how would you do that with a drone? That would mean that you could only, it doesn't seem parallel to me.
I'm sorry, I don't
So-
follow.
You're saying you would actually have to have a weapon on it for
For
us
it to be prohibited from sale through the program, right, they wouldn't be allowed to buy a drone that had a weapon attached to it.
But they would be able to buy a drone or an aircraft.
Right, as long as there was no weapon attached to it.
Okay. I got it.
But then you could obviously later affix your own. Senator Jackson.
I think, so, classic case in point, we want an armored vehicle to assist our SWAT team or, to help out. So we're right next to DC. So oftentimes when events are in DC, the local agencies will help out. And sometimes if there's an event there, you send your vehicles down. But we can't purchase from the military district of Washington, and say, hey, send us over a tank that's fit to go, or a Bearcat that's fit to go. So the weaponized piece, Senator Hedelman, that means that the vehicles that we have purchased over the years can't be weaponized for the military. It's just a vehicle. We're purchasing it for the shell of the vehicle. So a drone, many agencies have drones. Many of our ag folk have drones. But there are drones that are out there that are weaponized. I mean, we see that all the time, so UAVs. So we are not, the agencies will not be allowed to do that. So obviously,
guess
when
to her point,
the
though-
SWAT members jump into those vehicles, they're armed. So
No, I get that. I mean, and I see what Senator Bailey's saying. I mean, I have no problem with that. Like, especially but I guess the point is, like, you're missing the point. You could still weaponize it afterwards, after the fact. And that's this bill wouldn't capture that activity.
Well, you could still do that even with this bill.
True. That's what I'm saying. This bill wouldn't capture that activity, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, but I haven't heard, I mean, that'd be a hell of a strategy to
I
take
know.
care of, car chases, but I haven't seen anybody deploy a Predator drone with Hellfire missiles on a car chase yet.
Quick question of the veterans, Senator Jackson, Senator Bailey, and Senator Huff, as you've actually seen action, can you have an armor vehicle that doesn't have any weapons on it? Is there such a thing? As an,
all the time, going up and down 95.
so you can have an armor vehicle, but it doesn't have any weapons on it, right?
Yes, you can. Yes.
Okay, and you said that it's used in like search and rescues? That's, okay. Okay, just
You have some
wondering.
that are used in search and rescue, and some that are used to, for, as was mentioned earlier. I mean, sometimes you need to get close to a building before you can get in that building to go get that bad guy out of that building, or someone that's hurt. So that allows you to get closer to the building. So
What does it look like? What is an armor? It's not like a tank, right? You're not talking about a tank? Yeah. So you're talking about just a armor vehicle? Like a,
Yeah.
but you can have it without weapons on it, without a weapon capability?
The Humvees that the Hummers, the Hummer trucks that you see around, they're a civilian version of a Hummer.
Is it?
They take that Hummer and they.
I'm just asking the veterans here.
No, he's telling you.
Thank you.
He's right.
Yeah, I was using a common example. I mean, they've been around forever. SWAT teams have had them. The movie Die Hard, haven't you seen that, where the people overtake the building? Well, LAPD does have those. They had SWAT teams. They have armored vehicles get up. They had like a battering ram to get in the building.
Some of them, like the MRAPs, they can take like mines. They can run, or IEDs. They're Senator Sidnor.
My question, I mean, given the conversation, is whether or not we want to be more specific as to the type of armored or weaponized vehicle there is. I mean, because as you had mentioned earlier, and I would believe that for the most part, the concern is of these huge military vehicles that are being used for intimidation purposes. And speaking to Senator Lee, I mean, it's my understanding that the president rides around in an armored limousine, but it's not something that would be used to intimidate the general public. I mean, there's a difference between and I'm looking. I was just doing a quick search on armored vehicles, and there's Bearcats and what do they call this? The Humvees, Daimler, Ferret, Mark. I mean, there's different vehicles that serve different purposes. So, I mean, again, I don't know if there's specific vehicles that could be purchased by law enforcement that we just don't want purchased. I mean, I don't know if that's another way of getting at it.
Let's make sure we understand the amendment before us. So it's your intent is to strictly speak to the vehicles.
I just want to strike the armored out of the vehicles part and just leave in weaponized. Strike armored.
Just from vehicles.
Yes.
Is that what? Go ahead. Go ahead.
You don't want weaponized aircraft, drones, or vehicles.
Yeah. So
You leave it for all of them.
But he wouldn't have touched those.
no, the amendment that what I want to do is what Jamie mentioned is I want to do on. I just want to say for drones, for aircraft, and for vehicles that they cannot be weaponized. That's it. And I want to leave the armored stuff alone because it's not clear on the helicopters and for the other things if that's going to prohibit us from buying things that we're using not in a weapon sense, but as Senator Sidnor said, that are armored sense. So.
So going off of the reprint, the language would now read a law enforcement agency. This is starting at line 12 on page 2. A law enforcement agency may not receive the following equipment from a surplus program. 1, weaponized aircraft, drone, or vehicle. 2, a destructive device. 3, a firearm silencer, or 4, a grenade launcher.
Yes. I'd like to, if we could just do that amendment first. That's my big one I want on. Yeah, I put the amendment more. The last thing I'll say about it is weaponized means offensive, armored is defensive. So if we're trying to protect the police, the last thing I'll say about it is you may remember in LA, there was the guy that had like full body armor in the late 90s, and like machine guns, and the police had like no armor, nothing, were getting killed everywhere. So there's a reason for an agency to have an armored vehicle.
Sorry, the amendments for us would be second. We'll do a roll call. I'll just say this. Look, like, again, sorry, go ahead, Senator Sidnor, and then I'll make a comment.
I was just about to say, I mean, this is your bill. Do you accept, I mean, is it a friendly amendment?
So it's neither friendly nor hostile. Like, so it's just roll and see what happens. You know, I'll say, jump ball on this. The intent, my intent was basically to make sure that, we weren't kind of subsidizing weaponized equipment militarized equipment into our communities. And B, there is an element of force projection and intimidation that I think you have to be, serious about. Again, obviously you want law enforcement officers to have the equipment to accomplish their mission and be safe. So there's a balancing act there. Vote your conscience, so to speak. I mean, I don't think it's a hostile amendment, and it's not a friendly amendment. So just go with whatever you want. We're going to have some definitive answers coming after this, Bill. So. So it's been seconded. We'll do a roll call.
Vice Chair Wildstreicher.
Yes.
Senator Lee.
Yes.
Senator Castley.
Yes.
Senator Heddleman.
No.
Senator West.
Yes.
Senator Sidnor,
No.
Senator Jackson,
Yes.
Senator Bailey,
Yes.
Senator Carter,
Yes.
Senator Huff,
In case German terrorist ever sees a building in Maryland, yes.
Vote no.
Chairman Smith.
No, I'll go no, it's fine. All right, so the amendment's on. Are there any further amendments? All right, can we vote this one out? Is everyone fine with this one? Is everyone okay? Senator West has a question.
Yeah.
Now to the meat of the evening. Senator Carter, Senate Bill 627. Sorry? All right. Game's on.
So, Senate Bill 627, this was the bill that we discussed on Friday of last week and Monday of this week. It repeals the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights and lays out procedures for discipline of police officers. There are a few amendments in your packet. Actually, there are two amendments in your packet. So the first is from Senator Cassidy, and this is 388471. And this is based on language provided by the FOP.
Can we do, Senator Carter, do you have amendments first? Do you have amendments?
I don't know if they made it, they were technical, I don't think any of them were controversial, so did you wind up having them, Jamie?
It doesn't sound like they were ready yet, but, it sounds like we're still waiting on them.
Why don't we just go through these, and if I don't think any of them were controversial amendments in any way. In fact, some of them may have been just balancing amendments.
Do you think we, how much time do you have? Okay. So do you have them, or you don't have them?
No, I don't have Senator
Okay.
Carter's amendment.
Great, all right, so we'll continue to work, we'll work on Senator Kelsey's amendment.
So the first, actually, Senator Cassidy, there were two amendments in here. Is there one that you'd prefer me to do first, or?
They both propose a hearing board, and the one would make the hearing board final, and the other would provide final discretion to the chief or sheriff to make for discipline. But, I guess sort of conceptually, that's really the main difference here between these two. Under the current bill, the hearing board does everything under the current bill, and this would the one has a hearing board, right? Senator Carter, I think under your bill you have the sheriff or the chief investigates, and the chief makes findings, or the chief's designee, and then that's final. I think isn't that right?
Well, it's final unless the officer has contested.
I can't hear. I'm sorry.
No,
Put
it's
your mic. Thank you.
It's final unless the officer has contested issues of fact or law, or, and wishes to have then a contested hearing on those issues. So basically, whoever is the designated investigator for the agency investigates. They come up with complete the investigation, the chief reviews it. Under certain circumstances, the chief makes his decision. Chief's decision, in some instances, is relatively final, where there has been a litigation in criminal court. Then there would not be a need to have a contested hearing on the facts. They would go straight to an appeal to the circuit court, as they would now after a trial board. But if there are contested issues and there hasn't been a prior finding from court litigation of any sort, then they get a contested hearing with one hearing officer, not a board, not a trial board.
Right. And so this would reinstate the 3-officer board plus 2 civilians. Each of these would reinstate that you'd have a hearing before, if they elect, they can just, like you, as yours, have an investigation, and then the chief says, here's what you're going to get, and they can just sign off on it, which is most cases is what happens. But in these, it would reinstate the hearing board of 3 uniformed officers plus civilians, 2 civilians on it, and then in the one amendment, the hearing board would be final, and the other is that the chief would have the final say. Those are the two different. That's the difference in those amendments.
So I'd ask the committee to resist the amendments. A part of the thought.
Is this which? One of them from you.
Which one? No, I thought Castley just presented. He said one would be a trial board, be final, and the other would be a trial board, and then it would still go back to the chief.
So there's only one, a big amendment, Castley amendment on the bill, right?
No, there's 2.
Actually takes out, just sort of going off of the bill language. If you look at page 5 of the reprint, it specifically provides that the term law enforcement officer doesn't include the head of the law enforcement agency. Now, the current LEOBR does contemplate discipline of the chief of a law enforcement agency, but there don't seem to be similar provisions in this bill. So I think that accounts for that. If you go to page 6, and just to follow on what Senator Castley was saying, this affects language that was brought up during the meetings last week and this week. And in lines 22 through 26, that's what was providing for the investigation to be required unless the law enforcement officer had been convicted of a crime. So what this would say instead of the current language is that before imposing any disciplinary action related to misconduct by a law enforcement officer, the agency shall investigate the alleged misconduct unless, in relation to the matter or matters at issue in the disciplinary proceeding, the law enforcement officer has, 1, been convicted or received probation before judgment for a crime of violence, a felony, or a misdemeanor that carries a statutory penalty of more than 2 years, or has been convicted of a common law crime and received a term of imprisonment of more than 2 years. That tracks with language that I believe is almost identical to the disqualifying crimes for firearms possession. I can stop at any moment if anybody.
Let's go back.
Things, and I wanted to backtrack.
Yeah, let's go to the first thing at first.
Sure.
So let's go back to the board that Senator Castley's amendment is trying to establish, and then.
I know, because I'm confused, because first we're talking about trial boards, then you're
Yeah,
going to
let's just
the
stick on that one
names
thing
of
first.
the chief, or whether they're included, and then you're going to crimes.
Yeah, so let's stick on the one part first. Okay. So, the first part of Castley's amendment.
The amendment number reads,
So that's on page 10. And
So
the,
hold on. So we're Senator Cassidy's amendment, and it's 388471/1, right?
Right.
Okay.
So to that point, that's on page 10 of the reprint.
Reprint?
And it provides that the chief shall appoint a hearing board of 5 individuals who had no part in the investigation of the law enforcement officer who's the subject of the disciplinary proceeding to preside over a hearing held under this section as follows. 3 individuals who are sworn law enforcement officers, including 1 individual who's of equal rank to the officer who's the subject of the disciplinary proceeding. And 2, if authorized by a local law or ordinance, 2 individuals who are members of the public who have received training administered by the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission on police discipline and procedures, or if a local law or ordinance hasn't authorized appointment of members of the public, then it should be 2 individuals who are sworn law enforcement officers. The chief would appoint 1 member of the hearing board as the chair, and each member appointed has voting rights.
Okay, just real quick. So Senator Bailey had something to say, and then either Senator Carter or I'll go, but I'll go after that.
So in all due respect, if we're going to start with this bill, we should really start at the beginning. I think the way this happened was Senator Cassidy has 2 different amendments. He was simply implying the difference between the 2. They're both at page 10 on the bill, and there's multiple things when you're talking about the law enforcement officer Bill of Rights that build up to when we get to page 10, right?
Right.
So it would just randomly going in to say, well, we'll pick this and we'll do this, sort of puts everything out of whack.
You are
And
absolutely
so-
right. You're absolutely right.
So I think we should start at the beginning and work through the bill. When we get to this section about how a hearing board's going to be, we should then discuss that. But depending on how the hearing board's going to happen is going to be dependent upon what we do at the beginning of the bill. So,
No, that's you're absolutely right. So I guess my question then to Jamie is the amendments to start at the beginning of the bill from Cassidy. Do you have those in order yet?
Yeah,
Yeah. So yeah. Sorry, I think there's confusion. If you just start from the beginning, please. Yeah, we'll start from the.
The chief, or is that what?
I thought it seemed like you started here on page 10, but
Who's defined under the bill?
I mean, the Cassidy amendment is actually the union amendment. I just rushed it to Jamie because I thought it was important to get started, get things written. So this is not, I'm not writing on a clean slate here. This is, I just tried to move something to Jamie because I knew it had to be written. And so I basically took their thoughts and moved it. But this is, I hate to say it's the Cassidy amendment because I'm just the guy who clicked send real quick and got it to Jamie. Okay?
I know the
Thanks.
feeling well. Okay. All right. So Senator Jackson, and then we're going to restart this whole thing fresh. And Jamie, you understand where you're going now. But Senator Jackson, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think there's mass confusion today because I've been looking for my amendments, and I think I found some of my amendments, and I don't know how that happened, but part of my amendments dealt with my dealing with the chiefs and the union folks, and so in reading, I see what came across today was, 2 packets for Cassidy, so. as we proceed, I guess I'll identify, I've already had a side conversation with Jamie earlier, some conversation with my office earlier or whatever, so.
So if
I
we're
don't know how
going
we
through,
rectify this because they're under somebody else's name, some of them.
that's fine. So as we're going through, just make sure you flag that for us when we
Gotcha.
go there.
And to be really clear, feel free to take what is under this amendment and take it for your own.
Can we-
Again, it's not, I don't have ownership on this thing, so feel free to go to Jamie and say.
I got you.
This piece of this amendment be mine, and this piece be mine. You're not stealing my work product, okay? So I'm just trying to help us move along faster.
Got you.
Senator West.
We started this meeting at 10 after 4, and it's now 1 after 6. So we have, if we're going to
Yeah,
keep to
we've
the
got
2
someone
hour.
keeping the time here. I'll let you guys know when
Okay,
we're at the
thank
2 hour
you.
mark. Don't worry, I'm definitely on top of it.
Okay.
No, I hear you. Senator West, honestly, we are, I know we're getting down.
I just, we're starting on a very long bill with a lot, so,
I understand.
okay.
And I apologize. That's what I was actually doing earlier was going in sequentially. So the first changes that the amendment makes to the bill are to the definition of law enforcement officer, and that's on page 5 of the reprint that you should have. So that's page 5. This is amendment, just so everybody's on the same page. This is Amendment 388471. So this excludes the head of a law enforcement agency from the definition of law enforcement officer. The next change that the amendment makes to the bill is on page 6. And these are lines 22 through 26. Those are stricken. This deals with the requirement to investigate matters of misconduct before imposing discipline. So it alters the existing bill language by providing that before imposing a disciplinary action related to misconduct by a law enforcement officer, a law enforcement agency shall investigate the alleged misconduct unless, in relation to a matter or matters at issue in the disciplinary proceeding, the officer has been convicted or received a PBJ for any of the following crimes: crime of violence, felony, or a misdemeanor that carries a statutory penalty of more than 2 years, or has been convicted of a common law crime and received a term of imprisonment of more than 2 years. The next...
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just.
Figured we were just going to go through the whole thing.
Yeah, so look, he's going to run through the whole thing really quick, and then we're going to go back to the front again and work our way through the bill. So he's just giving an overview right now, and then we're going to go back to the front and start there, and we'll work our way through. We have 19 minutes left into the 2 hour section. We've got a clock going up here, so let's just run through these amendments, and then we'll start sequentially from the first one after he's just explained the entire packet.
The next change has to do with investigations. It's on page 7 of the reprint. This is line 12. So the bill language currently provides that an investigation of alleged misconduct may be performed by a sworn law enforcement officer or a person who's not a sworn law enforcement officer. This amendment changes it to provide that it can either be a sworn law enforcement officer or also a civilian, but the person, if they're not a sworn officer, needs to have received training administered by MPTSC on investigation of misconduct committed by law enforcement officers. There's a change in here that actually reflects a technical change that was raised by the judiciary, not FOP, and it deals with where subpoenas are, or petitions to enforce subpoenas are filed. The judiciary had advised that the current language, and this actually appears elsewhere in the code too, requiring that the petition be to the state court administrator didn't seem technically correct. So this provides instead that if a person fails to comply with a subpoena issued under this subsection on petition to a circuit court of competent jurisdiction, the circuit court may compel compliance with the subpoena. The next changes are on page 8. This strikes a provision in the bill that allowed the officer to get a copy of the investigatory file in the disciplinary proceeding if they paid a reasonable fee for the cost of reproducing the file and exculpatory information. Actually, it looks like an additional word should be lined out there, so the word information in line 16 for some reason stayed in. So essentially now,
Information is struck. I'm sorry, it's grammar stuff, but it's because information is struck on line 14.
you're right, Senator. So with the amendment, how this would work is that the law enforcement agency would be required to provide the officer with a copy of the investigatory file and any exculpatory information if the officer and any representative of the officer agree to execute a confidentiality agreement not to disclose any material contained in the investigatory file and exculpatory information. So the wrong information is stricken. The next changes provide that the current bill provides that the chief or the chief's designee shall provide the officer with a written summary of facts and evidence used as the basis to conclude that the officer committed the offense, and that the officer is subject to disciplinary action. It takes out these provisions in lines page 8 from line 21 into page 9 and line 6, and just it provides that after the investigation, when the chief conducts a review of the entire investigative file, the chief shall make a recommendation for the disciplinary action to be imposed, if any, and after the chief has recommended disciplinary action, the law enforcement officer may accept the disciplinary action recommended or can request a hearing before the board that the committee was discussing earlier. The chief is not required to review an investigatory file, and the law enforcement officer is not entitled to request a hearing under the subtitle if the law enforcement officer has been convicted of or received PBJ for any of the following. That would be crime of violence, a felony, misdemeanor carrying, penalty of more than 2 years, or a conviction for a common law crime where the sentence was more than 2 years. The amendment also repeals a provision requiring the chief or the chief's designee to meet with the law enforcement officer. You may recall this meeting was required to take place before the hearing process that's laid out in the bill as it was introduced. At that meeting, the law enforcement officer could raise objections to the investigative findings, submit additional evidence, or mitigating circumstances. So those provisions of the bill are stricken. The meeting doesn't happen at this point. So the as amended, and now I'm on page 10 of the bill, it says if the chief proposes disciplinary action, the chief or the chief's designee shall provide the officer with the proposed disciplinary action in writing. The proposed disciplinary action shall include a summary of the facts and evidence used to conclude that the officer committed the offense or offenses for which they're subject to disciplinary action. Now, on page 10, there's the new section 3105. This is line 11 on down of the reprint. This provides for the hearing procedures. It says that if the law enforcement officer requests a hearing in relation to the disciplinary action, the chief shall order a hearing and make findings of fact and recommend the discipline, if any, to be imposed by the chief in the matter. So this sets up the trial board as being a fact finder, but also having an advisory role in the discipline. The chief is required to appoint a hearing board of 5 individuals who had no part in the investigation. These would include 3 individuals who are sworn law enforcement officers, including one who is of equal rank to the law enforcement officer who's subject to discipline. And then the other 2 members depend on whether or not a local law or ordinance has enabled civilians to serve on these trial boards. So if it is authorized by local ordinance, then civilians could serve. If not, then those 2 other members would be law enforcement officers. One serves as the chair, appointed by the chief, and each member has voting rights for matters before the board. There are technical and conforming changes on the next couple of pages. And after the hearing's concluded, I'm just going to pick up on the reprint, page 12, line 18 and 19. So after the hearing is concluded, the hearing board shall prepare written proposed findings of fact and a recommended disciplinary action, if any, to be taken against the law enforcement officer. From here, the board provides its written findings of fact and a notice of any disciplinary action that's recommended, both to the officer and to the chief. Then 60 days after receiving those findings of fact, and it should say, and the recommended disciplinary action, the chief is required to review and determine the appropriate discipline, if any, to be imposed against the officer. The chief is specifically, and this is at the bottom of page 12, specifically prohibited from altering the findings of fact as determined by the hearing board. And it doesn't say this in the amendment, but that is meant to imply that they do have discretion over the disciplinary action. The next provisions that are altered by the amendment, if you turn to page 13, this is lines 13 through 16. This affects the statute of limitations, or the limitations period on when a disciplinary action can be brought. You may remember that the bill as introduced says that the disciplinary action can be brought or needs to be brought within 1 year after the law enforcement agency becomes aware of an act that gave rise to the disciplinary action. But there are exceptions as it was introduced. Those are that the officer can be subject to discipline at any time for an offense relating to criminal conduct or use of excessive force. For an offense that was the subject of a civil suit, the exception applies 1 year after final disposition of the civil suit, or for an offense that reasonably required more than 1 year to investigate, promptly after the investigation is completed. So what this does is it strikes the provisions relating to the civil suit and to the provision for 1 year after, or excuse me, for initiating it promptly for an investigation that reasonably required more than 1 year to complete. Just going through to page 14, This deals with suspensions of the law enforcement officer, provides that the chief or chief's designee may suspend a law enforcement officer, this is just starting at line 1, without pay and suspend the officer's police powers on an emergency basis if the officer is charged with a crime committed in the performance of the officer's official duties, which is either a crime of violence, a felony, or a misdemeanor carrying a statutory penalty of more than 2 years. This is a little bit different than the language that was earlier in the amendment because in this case we're dealing with a charge and not a conviction, so you wouldn't know what the penalty of the common law crime would be. If you go down to the bottom of the page, this is at line 24 to the bottom of the page. It strikes language relating to restitution. The bill is introduced required that, or provided that a law enforcement officer who's placed on leave without pay, or excuse me, could be required to make restitution for loss to the law enforcement agency's property due to the law enforcement officer's negligence. It said that that was not a disciplinary action, that the requirement of restitution was not a disciplinary action within the meaning of the subtitle, and had a provision that restitution couldn't exceed 3% of the officer's annual base pay. So that language is coming out with the amendment. The next changes that are made are on page 15. This is line 17 on down. It repeals the provisions relating to local jurisdictions being able to establish the boards or the review boards that would have essentially the powers of the chief in disciplinary proceedings.
You give Senator West. We got 5 minutes left. So.
Okay.
Yeah, we're almost done. We'll make some.
Oh, I apologize. So, Senator West, you're right. I got ahead of myself. So this is page 15, lines 17 to the bottom of the page. That does pertain to the right of appeal. So the bill, as it was introduced, had provisions that allowed the law enforcement officer to appeal to the chief if the chief's designee had imposed or the disciplinary action. So in this case, it had removed the provisions of the bill that related to the chief's designee imposing discipline. So those parts of the bill were coming out. And then on page 16, this deals with the political subdivision or a county being able to adopt a local law or ordinance establishing an oversight body. And as I said, that body would have had would have the powers of the chief essentially in disciplinary proceedings. And that is the extent of the amendment.
All right, we'll let Senator Carter chime in here. But so here's what's we've run up to our time limit for meeting in person. So I think we've got 3 minutes or so left. So we had two options. We could take an hour-long break. They could scrub the room. We could come back, or we could come back tomorrow at 10 o'clock before the floor. So we're going to come back tomorrow, 10 o'clock before the floor, fresh eyes. You have these amendments before you to consider. You can drum up your arguments, do your research overnight and in the morning, and then be prepared. I do have a question, though, for people, just for the committee members. So we are in receipt of pretty much, are there any more forthcoming amendments to the LEOBR that folks have in the pipeline?
My amendments should be in the packet at this point. They were submitted early yesterday.
Okay, great. So Senator Carter's going to be folded in the packet. Senator West has...
They should be added, my suggestion would be they would also be incorporated in what we have before us as a reprint, as it is my bill. I don't know how these other things became like a new bill, and my amendments are not included, so I'd appreciate that.
Got it. So we'll start off, and I think tomorrow what we'll do, is we'll start off with Senator Carter's amendments first, discuss those, and now we understand what the, not the Castley amendments, but the amendments that he's offered into for consideration. We understand that. We'll go through those one by one. Senator Jackson, can you tag Senator Jackson?
Yeah, it seems like the majority of the amendments that I was submitting, or I thought I submitted, were mentioned in Jamie's presentation, so.
Okay.
I don't
So-
know.
Senator Castley already said that they were the union amendments. So. That's
Okay. We'll make sure, look, you do the crosswalk, figure out which ones are different and the same, so we'll have them for consideration. So I think we're going to be able to get through this tomorrow morning, and if we do not have a double session tomorrow, then we're going to come back and vote for 2 hours after session, if there is no double session. So potentially 2 voting sessions tomorrow. All right. The other amendments will be distributed as soon as council and staff has them. They will be emailed to your laptop. I know, Senator, to your offices.
I mean, I think it's the same courtesy as like the FOP in terms of the reprint of the bill, just saying.
So were her amendments not reprinted? Or?
No, they, apparently, even though we did submit them early yesterday, they didn't get included. Apparently, maybe my staff did something technically wrong, not submitting to the right place. I'm not sure, but. at
We'll get
any
it
rate,
right.
We have them now.
We'll get it right. We'll get it right.
Reprint then. right?
Correct. And we'll
Because it's
consider
easier
them
to read
first,
that
and then
way.
we'll go over these other amendments that we just got an overview of. All right? Excellent. Have a good evening.
Thank you.